Hi, my name's Steve Logan. I'm a Welsh songwriter and rock musician. I'm going to talk today about Neil Young's Glastonbury 2025 setlist. A setlist is something that a musician might give a lot of thought to, rather like a track list or running order on an album. It will not necessarily be something that members of an audience think about, although they will be affected by it. I'm going to look at Neil's set list, but I don't want to imply that he planned it with any great deal of conscious precision, as if he was giving a lecture. I think he probably would have composed it more in the same way that we compose a lyric, where it's often a matter of following an impulse. That impulse may have an underlying logic, and that's what I'm going to try to get at today. Neil Young last played Glastonbury in 2009, so that's 16 years ago. He's now approaching his 80th birthday, and I think he must at some level have been thinking of this as an important performance. And yet the performance itself had the look of almost any other performance, which again I think he would treat as an important performance. That's to say, it had mistakes in it, it had some rough playing in it, but it was filled with energy which grew as the set went on. There's a story that when Neil Young was on a TV show and he had to play Rocking the Free World, he spent a considerable amount of time backstage with a personal trainer to get himself worked up to the point of energy, what he called the blood level, that he would be at if he'd been performing for an hour and 40 minutes, so that he could just walk into the room and then play the song as if it was at the end of a set. That's clearly very important to him, the feeling of authenticity, the feeling that somebody's getting a unique performance, but also that they're getting a performance which is charged with the right kind of energy. He doesn't, I think, when he's performing, do something which I sometimes characterize as watching yourself. Occasionally you can see that performances are a bit spoiled or constrained by the fact that the performer is very self-conscious, that they're thinking about how they look or how they're playing or how they're coming across, and it's getting in the way of their ability to express themselves. I think that Neil Young has worked pretty hard all his life to try and get free of that, to avoid what he thinks of as overthinking. He often has said that in writing songs, he's trying not to edit himself, and he credits his thinking on this subject to his friend and great producer David Briggs, who was once asked how it was that Neil Young managed to be so prolific and produce so many albums, and he said it was because he wasn't sitting in the barn thinking about take 49. Just as an instance of the sort of thing that Neil Young is trying to get into all performances, including recorded ones, you could take the solo on Cortez the Killer on the Zuma album. You listen to that solo and it's quite clear that there are what some guitarists would definitely regard as mistakes in it, notes that are out of key. But although it would have been a relatively simple matter even then for an engineer to cut them out and drop in the right notes, Neil Young's decided to leave them there. And that's an artistic decision so as to preserve the actual feel of the solo that he played at that time. He does occasionally do things differently in recordings, but that's his general ethic, I think. And his live ethic is similar, that you're going to get a unique performance delivered to the best of his ability at the time. So what was distinctive about this Glastonbury set? It had 16 songs. And of those 16 songs, 4 were acoustic, just Young playing on his own. And one was played on a pump organ, and the rest were with his newly formed band, the Chrome Hearts, with whom he's just released an album called Talking to the Trees. What was interesting about the choice of songs, I thought, was how he had top and tailed the set. So the very first song that he performed was one of these acoustic songs, and it's one of the very first songs that of his that he's known to have released. I'm not necessarily saying it's among the first that he's written, but it was certainly among his very earliest songs. It's called Sugar Mountain, and he wrote it on his 19th birthday. It came out, it was first recorded as a demo in the following year, 1965, and then first released on Decade, a triple retrospective album that came out in 1977. Sugar Mountain is a song of regret. It could be thought of as a song that's nostalgic. It has the refrain, "You can't be 20 on Sugar Mountain, though you're thinking that you're leaving there too soon." Joni Mitchell heard this song and wrote a song of her own, The Circle Game, in response to it. I'm inclined to see the song slightly differently from the way that she seems to have interpreted it. She says that it's about not being able to play anymore at a particular club, possibly called the Sugar Mountain Club. But Neil Young comes from a very literary background, and his father was a pretty famous Canadian writer, and he would know, and would have known at 19, that people who listen to a song like that will not know necessarily exactly what the phrase Sugar Mountain refers to, if it's meant to refer to, let's say, the name of a club. It's much more likely that people are going to take it as representing a kind of place that, let's say, is sweet, or which you can get sweetness from. And it has going round it, people who are shouting out to call others to the fair, and people who are carrying balloons. I think it's possible that Neil Young may have known a 1920 poem by E.E. Cummings called In Just Spring, which also features people who are adults who are carrying balloons, a little balloon man who is whistling to a child. And I suppose that what both Neil Young and E.E. Cummings are trying to do is to evoke this feeling that you're moving out of a state in which you thought that the world was safer. And you're beginning to become aware of the adult world in which you have to negotiate and establish yourself. And he's saying that at 20, you can't any longer stay free of that particular responsibility. So that's the song that began Neil Young's Setlist, one of his earliest songs about looking back to a period of childhood security and innocence, in the sense that you aren't fully aware of the things that threaten the security that, if you're fortunate, you may have enjoyed, at least to some extent. The set, short of the encore, was ended by another acoustic song. And that song is much better known because it was on the 1972 Harvest album. And that song is Old Man. And it's extraordinary to watch Neil Young performing this now. When he wrote the song, he's told us that he was thinking of somebody that he thought of at the age of, when he was 24, as a very old man who was then, Neil Young thought, about 70. Neil Young is a fair bit older now than the old man that he says he was writing about then. So when he was 24 and he sang, "Old Man, take a look at my life, I'm a lot like you were," he's addressing an older person and saying that something like, although I look young, I have within me, some of the things that you have within you, but I know that you were young like me too. So he's looking at an older person and speaking definitely as a younger person. But when aged 79, he sings, "Old man, take a look at my life, I'm a lot like you." Insofar as he's thinking of, let's say, that particular old man who was working on the ranch that he bought from his early success, instead of thinking of that old man looking back, he's more likely thinking about his own self, when he was younger. And he's now become the old man. And when he sings, "I'm a lot like you were," he's both saying, "Old man, I'm a lot like you were," because he says that he's now an old man. But he might also be thinking of himself, age 24. And he's a long way from that. And yet there is this remarkable consistency, because he's still doing the same kind of thing that he was doing. He's still standing up on his own with an acoustic guitar and singing his songs. So the top and tail of the set list, I think, was meant to be an expression of the passage of time and his own attempt to remain constant to a vocation within that passage of time. In the middle of the set list, there is another gentle song called "Harvest Moon," which came out in 1992. And that's partly because of the video that accompanied it, which features his then wife, Peggy Young. That's taken as a hymn to enduring married love. Well, a couple of things have happened since that song came out. One is, of course, that Neil Young is no longer with Peggy Young. She died in 2019, but he had filed for divorce from her, I think, in 2014, and he's now married to Daryl Hannah. In the latest album, Talking to the Trees, there's a song called "Dark Mirage," which has the line he says in it that he's losing his little girl to the darkness inside. It's not clear whether it's the darkness inside her or the darkness inside him, or both. And then he refers to "Dark daughter called me stealing daddy, won't say what I stole." This is another characteristic of Young's body of work, huge body of work, that the biographical details or biographical context for a song is often hinted at pretty strongly, but quite rarely spelled out fully. And I suppose I take that as another example of Young's literariness. He knows how to draw on his biography without simply retelling it. But I was wondering whether "Harvest Moon" was there, partly because it's a song that's now drifted free of its moorings in his own personal experience, partly because it represents a crucially important relationship in his life that extended over a period of longer than 30 years. partly because it may have a connection to his daughter, whom he now seems to be having some difficulties with. So that's the beginning and the end and the middle of the set list. I think, incidentally, I'm wrong in saying that there were 4 acoustic songs. I think there were 5. And then a lot of the rest of the set was fairly full-blooded rock and roll, and included a number of songs that he's particularly well known for. Cinnamon Girl was there. Hey Hey My My was there. Like a Hurricane was there. And the main encore song, the first of 2, was Rockin' in the Free World. But if we look at the songs that he's chosen, look at, say, one of those songs, we can see that, again, it may be that Young is pointing to a certain kind of constancy in his career. Like a Hurricane is a song that's been performed on every tour since that he's done. I think almost every tour, if not every tour, since 1977. And that's not only reaffirming the popularity of the song, but it's showing how long he's been around for and how the song has endured despite many changing fashions. Around the more familiar songs, though, there are a number of songs that are less well-known, still well-known, but less well-known. Be the Rain, which, of course, hints at his enduring preoccupation with ecology, and Sun Green. Both of those came from the Greendale album, which is an album that commemorates an imaginary rural settlement that's under threat from newer developments, and that is keyed into Neil Young's general interest in protecting smaller farmers, or farmers with smaller holdings in the US, something that he's done with a series of concerts called Farm Aid for a very large part of his career. So and then it's worth mentioning that the very last song was Throw Your Hatred Down from 1995's Mirrorball. And one line in this song he repeated quietly when the song was closing out, and that was, "There but for circumstance may go you or I." And this is for me, a very delicate and important matter, because it's close to the spiritual centre of a lot of Neil Young's writing. He isn't a Christian, he isn't a proponent, I think, of any organised religion, but he does refer to songs as coming from the source. He does have a feeling that it's important for him to start recordings at the time of the full moon. He does think that the earth is something that it's logical for Native Americans to worship, venerate. So there is a strong impulse in him to recognize the value of something beyond humanity, which nonetheless protects humanity, or can protect humanity. And this last phrase, "there but for circumstances," a variant, as I'm sure he must know, of "there but for the grace of God." So it's like a secular version of that kind of sentiment. So to sum up, I'd say that the themes that are at work in his set list are time, the passage of time; ecology, the constancy of his concern with it; change, because if you compare a song like The Needle and the Damage Done, which he played acoustically, with, I suppose, Throw Your Hatred Down, which was 20 odd years later, or certainly if you compare it with anything from the current album, Talking to the Trees, you'd say that there has been a considerable amount of change in Neil Young's lyrical material, and even some change in the character of his electric performances. You could say that another thing that's very strongly being expressed in that Glastonbury set was Neil Young's live ethic. So, as I've said earlier, he thinks it's very important that the live experience should not be tampered with. You shouldn't be using, from his point of view, backing tracks or any sort of machinery that is intended to trick an audience into believing that you're performing something that really you're not. And you could say that that itself is a polemical statement these days. You can say that also the set was an expression of his characteristic blend of sensitivity and political edge. And then finally, I think you can say that the whole thing expresses a kind of willed optimism. There's a song in the set which may be addressed to Daryl Hannah, although it's written earlier than him, than his relationship with her, and it's called Looking Forward. It was released in 2000. It says, the lyrics say, "Looking forward, all that I can see is good things happening to you and to me." For a man of nearly 80 to be singing that is an expression of confidence, resolution, and gratitude. And I think all those things seem to be at work within this set. It was touch and go whether Neil Young was going to perform at Glastonbury. He said at one point that he thought that it was under corporate control and it wasn't how he remembered it as being. But for whatever reason, he changed his mind, and I think we should be glad that he did. There aren't very many musicians in rock music who have the length and breadth of career that Neil Young does. And whatever you think of him, he is a vital, ongoing, creative force in the music world. And I think it's good to recognise that, and if you like the music, be grateful for it. Thanks very much. See you next time.